Boa tarde, pessoal. Estamos aqui hoje, dia 24/5, transmitindo mais um seminário do programa de Ciência dos Materiais da Universidade Paulista. Estamos com uma convidada muito interessante aqui hoje, a Cristina. O doutorado dela é na área de História, mas ela está estudando a parte de Musicologia e uma das séries de jogos mais conhecidos da vida do videogame, que seria a série Zelda, né, que já passou por várias transformações desde 96 a 2017. Eu vou encerrar por aqui, vou deixar que ela faça as próprias apresentações e espero que todos tenham um ótimo webinário. Mais tarde a gente vai estar transmitindo o link para estar enviando os certificados. E caso vocês tenham alguma dúvida, alguma pergunta, vocês também podem mandando aqui no chat que a gente vai lendo e respondendo, tá bom? Ótimo webinário a todos, então. Christina, you can start your presentation, okay?
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening there. I'm Cristina. As Felipe said, I'm a PhD candidate from the University of Granada in Spain, and I'm going to be talking about video game music today, which is the focus of my research. Before getting started, I want to say thank you real quick to Felipe for inviting me to take part on this webinar, and also to Polly for being the one to connect us. And well, I really hope you enjoyed this presentation and that it serves to introduce you to a new field of study and also maybe help you appreciate music and especially video game music a little bit more. So, I'm going to start by introducing a little bit more of myself and what I did in order to get here. Academically speaking, I'm a musician, I'll play the keyboard, and I have been studying music since I was 7 years old. I have a very solid base in music history, theory, and analysis. And so when it came to time to choose my career path at that uni level, I decided to get a bachelor's degree in history and science of music or musicology. And after that, I did get a double master's degree, the first one in music education and the second one in musical heritage. I finished both of them in 2020 and decided to pursue a PhD. Oddly enough, video game music wasn't my first pick when I studied or when I did my first dissertations for my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. I was actually focused on the role of women musicians in the avant-garde musical scene of beginnings of the 20th century in Europe, but I decided to switch to video game music by the time of my second master's degree after I played The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild for the first time. It is worth noting, however, that I have always been interested in music and media. I did take a few courses in music in cinema during my bachelor's degree, and I also have always harbored an interest for video games and have a literacy in video games. So, after playing Breath of the Wild, I decided to look into music for the final dissertation of my master's degree in musical heritage. And what prompted me to do this was the fact that I, really love the music of this game, but also that I noticed contradiction reactions with OCT in online communities of fans. Many players claim that Breath of the Wild music lacked many of the signature tunes that appeared in previous games of the series, and that the game's music wasn't quite fitting for a Zelda title. So I wanted to look into this. For my research, then, what I did was analyzing from a formal and functional point of view the cues that accompanied both gameplay and cinematic moments in this game. And I isolated the motifs that related to previous games, and by doing so, I proved how Breath of the Wild's music did in fact connect to the Legend of Zelda overall musical legacy. This allowed me to notice the potential of the Legend of Zelda series for an extensive Ludomusicological research that used this series as some sort of example of the medium's potential for music expression and also composition. So, the word I just mentioned right now, Ludomusicology, is the field that, it refers to the study of music and sound in or related to games. It can apply more broadly to the overall relationship between music and games, not necessarily games related to digital media. The truth is that in practice, it mostly refers to the study of music and video games or interactive media. It is a discipline of musicology, that is the study of music and music-related phenomena, and it only very recently kind of separated from it. The moment of this emancipation is usually established on the date of the publication of current calling game sound. This is basically the Bible of Ludomusicology. It was the first book to focus entirely on video game music and sound, and to attempt to offer an history of music and sound in video games, and also theory and practice and specific mythos and terminology to refer to the study of video game music and video game sound. So, um, after this book, well, a lot of new spaces and new publications saw the light for the study of video game music. And I'm not going to dwell onto this a lot because there's like a really solid base of literature now. But I want to mention a few books that have helped shape ludomusicology as a discipline, such as Ludomusicology Approaches to Video Game Music. This is a book put forward by the Ludomusicology Research Group. This group were pioneers in the study of video game music from a purely musicological perspective instead of a more interdisciplinary one. And also the recently published Cambridge Companion to Video Game Music that also offers a really good base of theoretical models and answers to most pressing questions relating to video game music, such as its dynamic nature and issues of textuality or even performativity. So I want to mention too the Journal of Sound, Music in Games, which in 2020 became the first journal to focus entirely on publishing papers only relating to video game music and sound. Um, Apart from this, well, the amazing growth of ludomusicology as a field of study cannot be understood without looking a little bit into the work put forward by the many study groups that have helped push it forward, especially the Ludomusicology Research Group I just mentioned. This group is based in the UK, in the United Kingdom, and it was the first academic association to aim for the academic recognition of this subdiscipline, serving both as a meeting point for scholars all around the world to share their knowledge and to find resources, and also as a platform for them to express their work. And nowadays they are still the most relevant institution within ludomusicology, but new study groups have also joined them, such as the Ludomusicology Study Group of the American Musicological Society and the Society for the Study of Sound and Music in Games, which kind of has more of a broader focus. It's not just focused on music or in the study of video music from a musicological point of view, but it's more interdisciplinary. And also the Ludomusicology Society of Australia and el Núcleo de Investigación y Creación en Ludomusicología de Chile, who maintain more of a lower or more local profile. They are not as big as the ones I mentioned before. Also, as for the well, at the same time, all of these groups have created their own conference and events to help push the study of video game music and sound. The most popular one is the LudoCon, which is the one put forward by the Ludomusicology Research Group, and this one is held annually ever since its first edition in 2012. Also, the North American Conference on Video Game Music. This one belongs to the American Musicological Society and is also a yearly convention that is being celebrated since 2014. And also, the Ludomusicology Society of Australia and el Núcleo de Investigación y Creación de Ludomusicología de Chile, they also held one inaugural conference in each case, both of them in 2018. But as far as I'm concerned, they haven't held any other event of this kind ever since then. So, attending now to the situation in Spain, which is where I'm working, obviously, I'm afraid to admit it isn't quite as prosperous as it is within the Anglophone sphere. Well, interest in video game music can be traced back to the beginning of the century, similarly as it happened outside the frontiers of our country. It is true that we're not quite as advanced as they are. The beginnings of Ludomusicology here were very similar as outside of here. Mostly it was like in the form of loose papers that um, find their way into generic books about music in media. However, that call for academic attention that resulted in the emancipation of ludomusicology in the Anglophone sphere is only starting to happen now here. Um, to name some names, authors such as Juan Pablo Fernández Cortés and Lidia López Gómez have been the ones to advocate more fiercely for the consideration of videogame music as a valid subject of study here in Spanish musicological spheres. By establishing a bi-directional exchange with the Ludomusicology Research Group in UK, and by putting up papers of their own to slowly yet steadily introduce videogame music to a broader audience. I want to highlight, however, a series of events that significantly changed the course of Spanish ludomusicology in the last few years, by on the one hand serving as a meeting point for Spanish scholars interested in video game music, while also on the other helping the subdiscipline craft its own spaces here in Spain. So in 2020, the eSports Academy eDojo celebrated the first conference on video game music here in our country. Um, it wasn't quite the well, it wasn't really an academic kind of conference, but it featured presentations by scholars such as Lidia Lopez, who I just mentioned, and also Eulalia Febrer, who is also a ludumusicologist from here. And they participated with presentation of their own, so it kind of gave it some sort of academic view on this topic. And well, while this was, as I said, more of an informative event, it is still marked a milestone for Spanish ludomusicology. And the same year, in 2020, Juan Pablo Fernández published a paper focused on ludomusicology in one of the most relevant musicological journals here, Anardo Musical. And in it, he advocated for a change in musicology's general basis and perspectives here in our country, in order to better fit or better allow for the introduction of video game music as a subject of study and for the introduction of musicology as a subdiscipline here. And we also got our first monograph dedicated exclusively to video game music that year, and it's a volume of the Journal of Sound, Silence, Image, and Technology. It was also edited by Lidia Lopez. And well, the efforts of the Spanish scholars to normalize video game music studies within Spanish academia can also be noted through their regular contributions to international conferences and journals, which kind of serves as a proof of the growing interest this topic is garnering among younger generations. For example, this past Ludothon, it was celebrated by the end of April and held in the Royal College of London, and it featured at least 4 different presentations by Spanish researchers, including Lidia Lopez and Eulalia Febrer, who I just mentioned, but also Ana Martinez, Alejandro Sanchez, and even me. And I was actually the one responsible of opening the event. So while there's still a long way to go, it is safe to affirm that ludomusicology is kind of a blossoming field within the Spanish academia. So, what about the Legend of Zelda, and how popular is it among scholars? Well, actually, a lot. And there are many books and papers on a breadth of topics related to the series, such as its ethics, theological content, cultural views, and of course, music. It has to be taken into account that this is a very popular series or video game series we're talking about, put forward by one of the biggest developers in the industry too, which is Nintendo in this case. And it is also a series with a very solid musical legacy. So many papers have been published on a few popular topics, such as the means of musical creation and expression facilitated by different games in the franchise, and also the narrative functions of music, mostly from a topic theory perspective. And también, well, sorry, and there's also papers interested in the reception and conception of Zelda music outside the video game medium, and of course on the construction and transmission of said musical legacy I just mentioned. Most of these papers, however, focus only on the most critically acclaimed and popular titles of the series. This being Ocarina of Time, for example, The Wind Waker, Majora's Mask, Skyward Sword, and more recently Breath of the Wild 2. But there is little attention has been paid so far to games more obscure in this sense, which also kind of coincides with the games that are meant for portable consoles. Um, there, there's therefore a significant lack of more extensive research interested in looking into the musical relation and evolution across the whole series, and this is the academic void that I will try or be trying to fill through my thesis. So, why this series in particular and not any other one such as Super Mario or Final Fantasy that will also fill in that gap of a long history with popularity among the public? Well, in the first place, as I mentioned before, this is a series that has always given specific relevance to music, not just as part of its OCT or soundtrack, but also as part of its gameplay system and narrative and lore, using the sounding art to connect its many games across time and through technological advances. And it is also, as I said, a quite long-running franchise that took flight during the first few years of the industry growing or growth after the crash that happened in 1983 and lasts to the present day, and allowing for a very in-depth look into the industry's evolution and most significant changes and how this affected music within the video game medium. And finally, because of that impact that is traceable both within academic spheres, for example, it is one of the few video game series to have a whole monograph, a whole book dedicated to music in one of its entries. This is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time that we can see here actually, and that it was published by King Summers in 2021. And also within popular culture at large, The Legend of Zelda series was one of the few video game franchise to have a whole tour of symphonic concerts with a program that focused and included just cues from the game. So now we know a little bit more about the academic background and field of insertion of this research, and also about the reasons why the Legend of Zelda works greatly as a subject of study for different approaches and scientific purpose. It is time to talk a little bit more into detail about my own research or what I intend to do. The hypothesis that serves as the North Star for my investigation that I will be trying to prove through my work argues that music constitutes one of the most relevant means of identification and signification in the Legend of Zelda series, and as such, its composition, representation, and in-game implementation have been carefully handled across the different titles that make up the franchise since its origins to the present day. So, furthermore, in order to better organize my work and be more specific or more detailed in my research, I have established two additional sub-hypotheses. The first one affirming that maintaining a series of identifiable music elements throughout the different titles that make up the Legend of Zelda's main chronology has resulted in the creation of affective links between the games and its players, affording the creative team responsible of the franchise to explore music's expressive potential through different associations based on nostalgia that have resulted in the concession of a cultural legitimacy with musical legacy that transcends the limits of the medium. And the second one asserting that the singularity and relevance given to music in the series and its impact outside the video game medium can help illustrate its cultural impact and value, and therefore serve to understand this case study as a reference within ludomusicological research, thus affording the extrapolation of the conclusions reached through this work to the video game industry at large. So, for the accomplishment of this hypothesis, two main objectives or goals have been established that serve to equally divide the thesis or factory into two principal or two main parts. The first one is meant to offer an in-depth approach to ludomusicology as a field of study, from its origins to its current state. This will include a revision of all the pre-existing literature on video game music, highlighting the most significant and influential contributions to the development of Ludomusicology as an independent subdiscipline, offering an overview of its most common topics of research, introducing the scholars leading its progress, its future aims and goals, and the different institutions and events that are right now dedicated to its promotion. I will also be introducing video game music as a subject of study by describing it and outlining the medium and its most significant characteristics and idiosyncrasies, presenting the specific terminology used for its study. And finally, to conclude this first half of the research, an examination and selection of the sources and methodological tools to be used on it will be also used, including an introduction and description of the specific theoretical models, parameters of the study employed all over the course of this research. Basically, in this first part, what I will be doing is introducing the academic background or the field of study where I'm working from, and also the mythos or theoretical mythos that I will be using in my research. The second chapter of the thesis will instead focus on the Legend of Zelda as a case of study, and it will consist in the analysis of the use and compositional evolution of music across the different games that make up its main series or chronology. This analysis will comprise three main goals. Firstly, a retracing of the history and consolidation of the series' musical identity by analyzing both formally and functionally the most prominent and recurrent musical themes making up the soundtrack of its different games, according to chronological and stylistic criteria. Secondly, the study of music as part of the gameplay system in Zelda games, describing the different modes of musical creation, interaction, and education supported by them, and their proximity to pre-existing systems of musical play, composition, and learning. And finally, the last section of the case study will consist in an approach from musical iconography and organology to the different musical instruments represented across the franchise, describing their physical appearance, in-game usage and playability, and meanings within the virtual world and the franchise lore. So, as for the methodology used, I'm going to be talking a little bit more into it. The first part of the research will consist in a standard revision and critical study of the pre-existing literature in order to establish the historical, musical, technological, and of course academic context and background of this research. Then will follow the definition and introduction of the subject of study, that is video game music, and its specific terminology. And finally, I will introduce and describe the different sources, methods, and theoretical models devised for the study of video game music and for this research in particular. So, focusing first on those sources I mentioned that will be used among the secondary ones constituted by the literature at large, evidently the main source for this research will be the 19 video games that make up Legend of Zelda's main series. These include the ones featured in the screen and potentially the Zelda title due to be published next year, if I make it in time. And under no circumstance do these circumscribe side projects or franchise derived from this main line, such as Hyrule Warriors or Cadence of Hyrule, or any other titles that haven't been accepted as belonging to the canon chronology of this series. And as can be noted too, these games will be consulted whenever possible through its original console. But in cases in which this isn't possible because of technological obsolescence or discontinued products, which is unfortunately the case in half of the more earlier products, alternative channels will be used, all of them provided by Nintendo itself and thus official and up for the standard of excellency guiding this research. I'm referring mostly to emulators that Nintendo has put up themselves in order to play past games in new consoles. So all of the games I mentioned will be submitted to various sessions of analytical play in order to extract three primary materials or in-game sources to be consulted. The first one is the sounding music material, that is the soundtrack's final realization as it is reconfigured in real time by the player in the moment of play. The second one refers to the programming and music data, and these circumscribe the configurative signs or commands written down in the game's code that determine how the music works within the game, how its models get assembled in real time, and what their functions within the game are. And finally, the game's musical material. These are the cues created and integrated by the composer within the game. And they will, well, these are the ones that will later be manipulated by the player through their interaction with the system. Because video game music is dynamic. It isn't written as a single track, but there are like small cues that the player activates or deactivates in the moment of play. So, since these sources, while incredibly important, of course, still can give us a complete view of the composer's and creative team's full intention and intended meanings for the game's soundtrack, a series of satellite sources that lie outside the medium's limits or are intrinsically related to it, and of course to the Legend of Zelda series too, will also be consulted. These include music scores and transcriptions, production documents, interviews, recordings outside of the game, of course, liner notes, associated music such as the one featured in trailers or such, reviews, player comments, and any other document that can help us understand better how this game music is intended to work and to use. This should help complete information gathered through the in-game sources by complementing it with the voices, intentions, and opinions of its creators and also consumers. Because another thing about video game music is that the player has a really important role. It's not like cinema music in the sense that when you're watching a film, you just sitting there and receiving the music file, and you can interact with it, but in a video game you can't. So you have to take into account the creative agency given to the player when you're analyzing video game music too. So since, as I just said, video game music is non-linear, and thus a definite and unique version of it for it to study doesn't exist. The results of this analysis of in-game sources will be represented in real-time game score graphs and music object relation graphs. These are two complementary models proposed by Jason Brain to account for the dynamic nature of video game music. The first one includes all the music changes and how they happen in real time in a video game during the gameplay. Meanwhile, the second one summarizes connections between musical cues independently of when and where they happen during the moment of play. These models will allow for a more intuitive visualization of the musical content in Zelda games, and this will help to establish links and relations between different cues across different games. Basically, it allows you to visualize the musical content of a game and how it relates both inside the game and outside the game with other games. So, graphs conducted on each game will also help isolate the recurring cues and motifs that make up the core of the game's musical legacy and identity, in order to further conduct a formal and functional analysis of the game. Starting with the former, the formal analysis, a formal musical analysis sorry, basically consists on the examination of the basic musical parameters or elements that make up a particular composition. Basically, what elements make that composition be what it is. Um, I'm going to include a revision of the music or the cue genre. This means if it's a vocal piece or an instrumental one. Its formal scheme, this refers to the composition's main thematic elements and sections, how they interact, how they are structured, and whether their intrinsic logic is based on repetition, contrasting musical ideas, or variation, for example. Also, the piece's music elements, including basic info on its melody, rhythm, harmony, texture, and timbre. Information such as tempo, dynamic, instruments included in the piece, tonality, and so on. And finally, lyrics, if it's applied, which isn't much of the case because there aren't many vocal pieces in The Legend of Zelda. And also, further references to potential influences from either inside or outside the game and/or the previous medium. It is worth noting that video game music doesn't exist in a void, so of course there are influence from previous tradition, not only just from cinema music, which is it's more direct, relative, let's say, but also from other kind of musical cultures and styles. And well, I'm bringing a few examples here, which should serve to see you or help you understand what this model of analysis is going to help us see in depth. So this is an example from The Legend of Zelda into the Past. This is a game from 1991 that explains the awful sound. But I wanted to see how the kind of analysis I just presented will help us understand how we get from this to this. So as you can see, it's the same material, but there's like 20 years of difference here, so we need to know how we get from here to here. I bring another example here, which is also quite interesting. This is a game from The Wind Waker. This is a game from 2002 or 3, depends on where you live. And well, this is how it sounded. So this is how this same cue or this same material was used later on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, published in 2017. formal analysis should help us see how compositionally wise we have gotten from the first example I showed you in each case to the second one, and also the meaningful implications it might have to the game series and also to the players. So attending now to the functional analysis of these cues, as was mentioned, it basically consists on examining the uses given to them inside the game and how they help shape the ludic experience and the meanings derived from this. For this, I have devised a new set of functions inspired by the ones defined by Teresa Fraile and also by Peter Moorman for music and cinema, and establishing a series of functions. So identifying or memoristic functions are the ones that refer from. A cue is meant to help the player recognize and remember a certain character, location, item, or event in order to help them follow the storyline and harbor affective feelings towards them too. Then there are also expressive or affective functions. This is when music acts as a mood indicator and also helps establish the affective tone of a certain moment of play. And communicative functions are particularly important in video games since they directly affect player performance. On the one hand, narrative functions support the game's growth and help the player follow along. Meanwhile, informative functions are the ones that convey essential information about game states and events to the player. Functions defined as aesthetic or ambiental help place the game action in a certain location or time period through the use of musical signifiers taken from specific music cultures that are also easily identifiable by the player. And structural functions are self-explanatory too. They help shape the experience either by supporting its external structure or architecture, distinguishing between game menus, credits, text, and text, and also internally by identifying musically the locations that make up the map of the game, and so serving as some sort of locational tool for the player to move around the virtual world. And finally, there are a series of intertextual functions that serve to situate video games within a broader popular cultural context, linking games to other media products such as films or TV series. So, again, this kind of analysis will serve to comprehend how similar motifs or cues have been used differently throughout the game or the series, and what this means within the general musical and technical progress of the franchise. I will bring one example here. If you notice, this is the main theme of the Legend of Zelda. Maybe this sounds familiar to you. And this is how it was first used in the first video game of the Legend of Zelda series. This is the title screen. And this is how the main theme was used in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. That was the last game published as part of the Legend of Zelda series. This is an by the way, this is after this one. So as you can see, the functions are totally different. Here it's establishing the mood and also helping identify the video game. But here it's used to identify Link as a character, not the game as large. So the examination of the different instances in which music has been used as a gameplay system across the Zelda series will consist primarily in the identification of the games that include musical play and the isolation of set mechanics in order to discern whether they are based on active listening and or memorization of melodic patterns and cues, playing music through different controls and or in-game musical instruments, conducting music and thus altering its tempo and or dynamic, or even composing original music within the game. Was identified this instance of musical play will be classified according to models proposed by Sonoda and Austin, defining on the one hand the level of proximity of this system and their sounding results to the traditional solfa, that is the standard Western musical system, and on the other hand, by analyzing the musical opportunities afforded by these games according to whether they are more procedural, that is, consistent on interacting with musical materials or procedures, or conceptual, which are those instances in which the game is rather themed around music or music-making context. Um, so these theoretical models will help us understand how musical play has changed from this. It's so great, but basically he plays the little flute that you can see here, and the enemy kind of shrink a little bit, so it's easier to take into. To this. Here we go. So in this case, the player only could press a button and the melody sounded on its own. Meanwhile, here the player is the one responsible of playing each note singularly. So this analysis will focus on how we go from this to here and also other instances. So finally, an organological study will be conducted over the singular collection of musical instruments practiced by the franchise. Organology is a discipline that usually works in tandem with musical iconography to help uncover the many layers of meaning carried by both musical instruments and their visual representations, often bestowed to them by the many cultures that have made use of them with different purpose and in various socio-historical contexts. These meanings can be seen to work as parametrical fields of connotation and thus exist alongside or in connection with, in this case, the musical instrument and or their pictorial representation. They are conditioned by many factors such as medium limitations and aesthetic choices. And well, I argue here that the organological study and classification of the musical instruments represented in or afforded by video games or a console can offer valuable insights into the game context of creation and intended meaning, into its reception and signification, and also into the tensions between fiction and reality that underlies every media product. Oddly enough, there are many organological studies that have been conducted on video games, and well, the reason for this is mostly that both organology and musical iconography um, have been kind of have shown so reticence to broaden their interest to include new means of music making brought by the digital era, and also that many of the methods used by these disciplines are rather obsolete. So, apart from our redefinition of the concept of instrumentality, new complementary models have been proposed lately to account for the multifaceted nature of this new sounding artifact. I highlight here the ethics of the instrument put forward by Trish and Bolan. This is a model, a complementary model, um, in which they offer four basic categories inspired by the four axes of the post analysis of the self relation to the self that serve to examine any kind of instrument, not just musical instruments. And well, these are the material disposition of the instrument, the instrument's mode of mediation, the map of mediation of which the instrument is part of, and the telos of an instrument activity or its end. So, this model has served as the basis for a new categorical model that I propose here for the identification, study, and analysis, and also classification of the musical instruments represented in or constituted by video games and consoles. This card combines traditional taxonomical categories, such as the one proposed by the Royal College of Music of London in its many catalogue of acoustic musical instruments, with new categories that are very suited for digital and virtual instruments. It includes four major boxes that correspond to the four categories of the ethics of the instrument that I just mentioned, and each of them includes a set of subcategories meant to help the researcher fill in the information regarding the instrument's context of creation and art insertion, morphology, uses and functions, and playability. It also includes a proceeding slot for any kind of graphic and or sounding material related to the instrument that can help in its identification, and also a final box, as you can see here, for any other kind of observations seen of relevance by the researcher. This model has been designed to be open, flexible, and extendable, and thus easily adaptable to fit any other instance of digital musical instrument. So, also, virtual instruments analyzed through the chart I just presented can be further placed along a continuum depending on their adherence to two key notions. On the one hand, their level of verisimilitude in their ethics compared to their in real life references required for their proper identification in game, and two, their level of logic narrative coherence within their context of insertion, required not to threaten the game's credibility and player immersion. These two models proposed here can serve to unveil the many meanings inherent to the reconfiguration and use of musical instruments in virtual contexts. So I bring a few examples here of musical instruments featured in the Legend of Zelda series. This is one of the earliest examples from Link's Awakening, 1993. This is the Ocarina of Time and the Fairy Ocarina from Ocarina of Time from 1998. This isn't quite a musical instrument, it's actually a baton, a conductor's baton, but well, it helps make music in games, and it also relates to music, obviously. And well, we have here the flute from Spirit Track, and the goddess harp from Skyward Sword. So we can see here how the musical instruments represented in this series have changed over time and with the advancement of technology. So that would pretty much be all of my research, and the question now remains, what do I expect to accomplish through this? Well, the main goal, as I mentioned before, is to attend to an academic demand that has yet to be covered by analyzing the use of music for all Zelda titles, not just its most popular ones, and thus helping deepen our understanding of the previous use of music and consolidation and evolution of its musical identity, highlighting the role of more obscure titles in this process and serving as a paradigm for the study of video game music as a whole. I also would like for this thesis to become some sort of handbook within Spanish Ludomusicology by offering theoretical models, terms, and tools of use, and also by helping to transfer knowledge from Anglophone spheres by translating some of their most relevant ideas and works. This should resonate within the broader field of Spanish musicology and thus contribute to the establishment of video game music as Polish subject of study, further helping in the research of spaces of its own, and also opening a two-way dialogue with musicology that results in the joint progress of both fields of study. And lastly, this research should serve to introduce new mythos and topics within international musicology, while also serving as proof of the steady flourishing of Spanish musicological study. So this is kind of the schedule that I have been following. At the beginning of my PhD journey, I kind of set these guidelines for myself. So last year, it was my first year doing my PhD, and I finished the first chapter of the thesis, and right now I'm working on the second one. I'm deep into the analytical play process and crafting the graphs of each game, and I still hope to be able to finish writing at the beginning of next year and wrap everything around summer so I can finish in time for November 25th when I should be finishing, but I'm not that certain about it. So just to wrap a little bit up. So at the same time, I have been working in my research. Of course, I have been working on other side projects, also related to ludomusicology, but focusing mostly on well, other games and topics. For example, I have analyzed musical narration on Journey from a thematic perspective, and I will be presenting the results of my research in a conference next month. And I have also examined musical instruments and musical play in games in impact. And I plan on analyzing Spanish musical topics in some cues featured on the Animal Crossing series. What well, what I, why I mentioned this project is because they have also served, inform, and polish my main research, and by allowing me to explore new theoretical models and adopt different perspectives. And they have worked kind of a safety net to try on these new methods. Well, that being said, I'm going to wrap this presentation by setting there my contact info in case someone wants to reach out to me after we are done here, and also some references that have helped in the making of this presentation, and also my general research. Just to some of them I have mentioned before, such as Ludomusicology, a British video game music, and the Cambridge Companion is also somewhere there. But I also recommend Understanding Video Game Music. It's a really nice book on video game music, and of course, Game Town is still a classic. And well, there's only one Spanish reference, but it's a really good one. So if you have time, I will also recommend to read Juan Pablo Fernandez Cortez article. So that will be it. Thank you very much for the attention. I really hope you enjoyed this little talk, and I'm all here to answer any questions or just chat a little bit more or just say goodbye. Thank you so much, and I'm going to be closing here so I can go back to here. Hi.
Thank you a lot, Christina. I'm going to start the questions now. I'm going to speak a little bit in Portuguese now
Yeah.
for the public here, and we're going to start the questions in just a minute. Muito obrigado, pessoal, por estar aqui. Esse webinário hoje foi um webinário bem diferente. A gente estava com a Cristina aqui. Acabou que no início eu não falei um pouco dela, mas a Cristina, o PhD dela é em História e Artes, com a linha de pesquisa em Música, Cultura, Criação e Educação, na Universidade de Granada, na Espanha. Então, a gente está com presença internacional aqui hoje. No caso, a gente optou pela dar essa apresentação em inglês, porque o espanhol não é tão usual, assim, digamos assim, como o inglês, então a gente acaba optando pelo inglês. Eu acredito que todos tenham entendido pelo menos um pouco, e o pessoal que tem um pouco mais de facilidade em inglês, eu acredito que tenha entendido bem. A gente vai iniciar agora as perguntas, e no mais agradecer vocês e a Cristina também. Cristina, I'm going to click the questions, so you're going to see the questions in your screen, okay?
Okay.
The first one, it's a
I'm
question of mine.
Yeah. Oh. Ludomusicology is, problems with terms for this case of every time you're trying to put a name to a theme, there are many issues that you have to take into account. Ludomusicology is made of the terms ludology on the one hand and musicology on the other one. So technically, ludology is a study of any kind of game, not just video games in this case. So when you're talking about ludomusicology, it technically can apply to the study of the relationship between music and game. This will include any kind of game. So if you're playing music in a soccer match, for example, in a football match, you can study it from a ludomusicological point of view. So it is true that by force of habit and by the natural use of the concept, it usually applies to the study of video game music, but it's a really broad term. And actually, when I defended this research plan for my PhD program, one of the tutors there kind of told me that I should be even more specific because ludomusicology is in fact a very broad term and it doesn't quite specify that you're talking about video game music. You could be talking about any kind of relationship between game and music. But yeah, I mean, it's right now it's the term accepted for the. If you look up ludomusicology, most of the results will probably link back to video game music.
Okay, well explained. The second one is from Poliana.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, for my main research, I'm not using any other kind of games because I'm focusing on the Legend of Zelda series. But, well, I do play a lot of video games. I do enjoy them a lot. And I am facing the chances that other conferences and papers give me to work on different games so I can also kind of take a break from this because it's like a lot, as you have seen, it's like 20 games that I have to play. So I'm working with, I don't know if you know Journey, but it's really a stunning game. You can actually play it on, if you have a PlayStation. I think it's like, it's really cheap, but it was even given for free during the quarantine in 2020. And it's a game that is just like 3 hours long, and I really recommend it because it's really beautiful. And the music was actually the first video game soundtrack to be nominated for a Grammy Award. So that speaks about the quality of this game's music. And I'm also working on Genshin Impact, as I said, because it has really interesting examples of music instruments and also musical gameplay. And right now I'm focusing too on, I want to work also in Pokemon because there's like a new Pokemon due to come out, and it's supposedly going to be fine in Spain. And I also want to look into the Spanish representation in that game and Animal Crossing too. But those are the ones I'm focusing on right now.
Okay, let's go to the another one. This is from Professor Rafael.
Oh, this is a really good one. So there's a lot of talk being done on this because, as I said, video game music is dynamic. So part of the experience of listening to video game music is conditioned by the way you're playing the game. So the way I listen to a video game or soundtrack and that you listen to it, even if we are playing the same way, it's most likely to be very different because the way I'm playing doesn't have to be the one that you are playing. But when you're playing or when you're listening to the music at home in a, let's say, commercial version of the music of the game in a CD or in a streaming platform, the music has been altered because you have to make a coherent musical discourse, so you have arranged the different cues in a particular order. So it does change because I'm going to put an example here of Breath of the Wild. Precisely, Breath of the Wild is a open world game, so you can actually go to any kind of area of the map in the order that you want to. But when you're listening to the OCT, these areas are, well, the music that accompanies these areas is actually arranged in a particular order. So if you travel the map in a different way and then you listen to the music, it might kind of alienate you a bit because it's not the same experience. And you kind of feel like it lacks something.
Okay. Uh, he gave some comment and another question as well. I'm going to put him in the presentation. Rafael, we were online with us, so he gave us this comment, and then he just wrote this question.
Yeah, actually, this is, well, I'm going to use a phenomenon that was actually termed by a professional of the cinematographic music, but he called this, well, Michel Chion. He referred to this communion between music and visuals as syncrasy. We are not, well, if a musical event and a visual event happen at the same time, we are kind of conditioned to understand them as going together. So obviously, when you're listening to music at home without necessarily seeing something at the same time, like you're playing the OCT, the original soundtrack at home, and let's say in Spotify or whatever, and you're not seeing at the same time because you're not playing the game, and it's not likely that this kind of OCTs bring any kind of visuals to work at the same time. So you're most likely going to get different meanings or even no meaning at all for the music that you're listening in that moment because you're lacking the visual that originally went along that music. So yeah, the experience is completely different. It's just natural, and I will say that obviously the original experience along the visuals is a more complete one.
It appears that music and psychology comes together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It's very very interesting. Very it's
yeah. There's
amazing.
a lot of work
Now
in this. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, your brain automatically says, "Well, this visual and this music goes together." So when you're just listening to the music that you have previously heard along a series of visuals, of course you're like, "Oh, I'm missing
Yeah,
something."
sure.
Yeah, it's very nice. I'm not asking much because I'm just showing the question of
Yeah,
the public, but it's very, very nice. I really enjoyed when you showed the difference between the games, the evolution of the games.
yeah, it's
It's
amazing.
amazing, Christina. You just made very well. Let's continue. So to put people, another question from Poliana.
Oh, this is a really nice one. I would say yes, because perhaps, well, obviously, video games draw a lot from of visually and of specifically musically from previous topics that have been established by mostly cinema, as I said before. Um, but they can also kind of subvert them, and they can give you a character that you might be like, pretty ambiguous about why they are there and what are their purpose, and maybe music gives you that extra cue of you should interpret them this way. So I will say that music does play an important role. It depends to how far the composer and the creators want to take it. I can't think of any example right now, but I would say that, for example, with the Final Fantasy series, there's a lot of work that has been done, and there are really interesting papers that are more focused on that psychology part of how music influences in the way that we understand what we are saying or what we are seeing, and also playing, the way we interact with the other characters. So I would say that yeah, it can, and more than we probably think they can.
Okay, so let's go to the last question. It's from Poliana again, but it's very nice.
Oh, I like this one. Yeah. So this is a really hard one, actually. I'm going to say that I do like Link's Awakening at all. And it's one of the earliest games, and it's not very frequent in academic literature actually, but it's the one Zelda game that has the bigger array of music instruments. It features a whole little orchestra, let's say, and along the ocarina that we have seen in other games. And I'm going to say these ones, but not the ones that appear in the original game, but in the remake. There's a remake for Nintendo Switch that was published in 2019, and I do like a lot how they kind of reconfigure the instruments from the original version. And I think I will say the art, that the Sharp Heart is a really, really cute one because it's like pinkish and golden, and it's really beautiful. And the Goddess Heart, I do love the Goddess Heart because it's also really symbolic within the game. The first time it appears, it's in Ocarina of Time, and it's played by Shake, and we learn later, spoiler here, that it's Zelda, and so the heart is inherited from the goddess, and she's the reincarnation. So it's a really meaningful object within the game, I would say.
Okay, Christina, I think we finished all the questions. I'm going to end this transmission now. So just wait a little bit in the room.
Oh,
And muito obrigado, pessoal. Estamos encerrando a transmissão de hoje. Estamos muito felizes aqui com a compreensão de vocês. Eu acredito que esse vídeo vai estar online no YouTube para quem tiver interesse de ver. E essa apresentação foi muito interessante, pessoal. Eu recomendo bastante vocês assistirem. É um tipo de pesquisa bem diferente do que a gente está acostumado a trabalhar na área de ciência dos materiais, na área de física, química e engenharia. Então, assim, eu acho que foi muito bom. Foi uma pesquisa muito interessante. A gente conheceu um pesquisador de uma área, assim, tão diferente do nosso dia a dia, né? E no mais, eu encerro agradecendo vocês novamente. Tenham uma boa tarde. E é isso, pessoal. Tchau, tchau.